Hi everyone, thanks for attending today's webinar. Just so you know, you can either call in to the code listed on your audio screen, or you can just listen right through your speakers. And if you have a question, please type it into the question log on the right hand side, and we will get to questions immediately if it's along with the slide, or we can just wait until the end and we'll address all questions. And we'll also have a portion at the end for discussion. My name is Katie Timmer, and I am an AmeriCorps Vista serving here with Mentor Michigan, and I'm here with Ben Gulka, who will be co-facilitating today's webinar with me. The Research in Action series was designed by Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. The series is designed to share the latest research with mentoring professionals and provide tangible strategies that can be implemented within programs. This series can help programs make decisions based on current research that is linked with positive outcomes. There are 10 issues. Each issue provides research, a peer-reviewed article written by a leading scholar summarizing the latest research available on the topic and its implications for the field. Action, tools, activities, templates, or resources created by Mentor with concrete suggestions on putting theory into practice, and resources, a list of additional resources for further research. Here you can see the 10 issues that are covered in this series. Mentor Michigan is hosting monthly webinars to share each of these issues with the field. Today's webinar will address Issue 5 from the Research in Action series, Why Youth Mentoring Relationships End. To view a complete list and dates of the Research in Action and other webinars, go to mentormichigan.org and then click on Training and Technical Assistance on the left-hand side. On this page, you will find a complete list of our upcoming training and technical assistance opportunities, as well as a link to our public Google Calendar. You can download Issue 5 from Mentor's website, which is mentoring.org. All 10 issues are available for free download from their site. If you haven't already, please download Issue 5. The research section of this issue was written by Renee Spencer of Boston University. Here is an overview of Issue 5. We will be discussing factors that cause strains on mentoring relationships and in some cases cause that relationship to end. Also, we will look at strategies to prevent some of these premature endings. A mention of youth mentoring brings to mind powerful and often moving stories of how a committed and concerned adult came along at just the right time and made all the difference in the life of a young person. But what happens when mentoring relationships do not go well? Today's webinar will focus on why some formal mentoring relationships end early. Understanding these reasons of why they end early can hopefully help us to prevent some of these terminations and help program staff to promote connections that are producing positive youth outcomes. And we're going to do a quick poll with everybody that's on the line, and it's, is match retention an issue in your program? And we're going to give you about a minute to vote. All right, everybody has voted in, and 100% everybody has stated that it is a critical issue. Although relationship failure rates can vary greatly across programs, general estimates show that only approximately half of the mentoring relationships established through formal programs last beyond a few months, and the rate is even higher among more vulnerable youth. This is especially disturbing in light of research indicating that when relationships end within the first 3 months, they have the potential to do harm to the youth. Negative experiences such as conflict, disappointment, and regret are a basic element of all interpersonal relationships, and of course can be expected to occur in some degree in youth mentoring relationships. Negative experiences may be even more significant for participants in youth mentoring relationships because at its core, mentoring is about building a trusting relationship and involves children who have different emotional and psychological needs. In addition, formal mentoring programs tend to match youth and adults from very different backgrounds. Most adults who volunteer to be mentors are white and reside in middle to upper income households, whereas many of the youth served by these programs tend to be minorities and to reside in low income households. Mentoring programs struggle with the tall order of facilitating the development of meaningful relationships between two strangers whose life experiences may be worlds apart. There are, of course, a number of success stories providing evidence that these differences can be overcome. However, paying closer attention to what happens when things do not go well can help us better identify and meet the special challenges posed by creating and sustaining formal mentoring relationships between youth and adults. Research that is focused explicitly on understanding negative youth mentoring experiences is quite rare. However, current research on mentoring relationships more generally, particularly that which addresses relationship quality and duration, does point to some important factors for understanding and preventing early endings. Today we're going to look at some of the research surrounding youth and mentor characteristics, relationship processes, program factors, and early ending matches in an attempt to understand some of the factors that contribute to why youth mentoring relationships end and to develop strategies and practices to prevent some of these premature endings. Some youth and volunteer characteristics associated with shorter matches have been identified. One factor is the age of youth at the time of matching. Community-based matches with older youth, about 13 to 16 years of age, tend to be of shorter duration than those with younger youth. However, a recent national impact study of Big Brothers Big Sisters school-based mentoring programs noted that middle and high school-aged youth tended to benefit more from school-based mentoring than did elementary school-aged youth. Other youth factors associated with shorter relationships include risk status and gender. Relationships with youth who have complex issues, such as a history of emotional, sexual, or physical abuse, or who were referred to a mentoring program in response to psychological or educational difficulties, tended to not last as long. In addition, female matches tend to end earlier, and one study found that girls were significantly less satisfied than boys in short and medium-length mentoring relationships, suggesting that girls may also be more sensitive to early terminations. On the volunteer side, one study found that adults with lower incomes tended to have shorter matches, as did married adults in their late 20s. It should be noted, however, that these findings should not be interpreted to mean that mentoring programs should not match older youth, youth facing significant challenges, or young married volunteers. Rather, they suggest that such matches may require a greater investment on the part of the program in the way of training, monitoring, and ongoing support and supervision to ensure the success of these relationships. I'm going to turn it over to Ben now. He's going to discuss some relationship processes and program factors.
Hi everybody, I'm Ben. We're covering a lot of ground and we're covering it quickly, so I just want us to pause for a few seconds. Are there any questions about what we've covered so far? We've kind of laid the overview, given you some of the ground research behind some of the stuff we're talking about. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in. I don't see anything coming in at the moment, so I'll assume that we're all on the same page now, and we'll keep moving forward. So I'm going to start our conversation a little bit around relationship processes, and what we mean here is really what's happening at the relationship level. So at this level, research shows that relationship duration and strength are associated with youth outcomes. So what that means is matches that last for a significant amount of time create more positive youth outcomes, as do relationships in which participants feel a sense of closeness or personal connection. So to put that in other words, matches that last longer tend to have better results for the youth, and matches in which there is a sense of close connection between the mentor and mentee also tend to produce more positive outcomes for the youth. Research demonstrates that programs have the best outcomes when matches meet for at least 1 year. And when we say at least 1 year, we mean 1 calendar year, the full 12 months, or 1 full academic year. So for the 9 months of the calendar year that the academic year encompasses. And that matches meet on average for an hour a week. So that's 1 hour once a week or 2 hours every other week. That seems to be the amount of time that seems to produce the best youth outcomes. There's also some evidence that matching mentors and youth on the base of shared interests helps to facilitate the development of closer relationships. So the importance of connecting mentors and mentees based on the things that they have in common with each other helps to foster closeness, and that closeness helps to foster better youth outcomes. Some other process factors that appear to characterize the endurance and level of support in mentoring relationships include the consistency of contact between the mentor and mentee, so how often they're meeting each other, and the mentor's approach to the relationship. So again, to foster the best possible youth outcomes, it's recommended that match meetings occur several times each month, and again, that's ideally once a week, and for a minimum of 4 hours per month, so an hour a week or 2 hours every other week. And again, that's on average. I'm a mentor in a community-based setting, and we really try hard to get together every week, but sometimes schedules just don't allow it. So on those weeks where we don't meet, I make sure that we get a little extra time the next time we meet together, maybe 2 or 3 hours. So we've already mentioned that closeness, so the level of closeness that the mentor and mentee feel in their relationship impacts youth outcome. And research suggests that mentors who engage in more social activities with youth, so hobbies and fun things, and this includes school-based mentoring and not just community-based mentoring. Mentors who engage in those type of social activities tend to report higher levels of closeness. So putting people together, matching people based on shared interests, and then encouraging those types of social activities can actually help to develop and foster positive youth outcomes. And in addition, youth in matches with adults who take a more prescriptive approach, and what we mean by a prescriptive approach is a mentor who tends to be emphasize his or her own goals, or a mentor who is maybe a little bit unrealistic in terms of what's to be expected from the relationship. Prescriptive mentors tend to be less satisfied with the relationship than youth in relationships where adults take a different approach. So on the one hand, we have the prescriptive approach where the mentor is trying to prescribe his or her ideas of what should be happening, or trying to prescribe his or her ideas of what types of activities should be happening. Those tend to produce less satisfying results. And then on the other hand, there are mentors who take a developmental approach. That's what we call the developmental approach. And these mentors tend to devote their efforts, especially early on, so in the early months of the match, to establishing strong connections with the young person. These mentors place high value on making the relationship enjoyable, so they value having fun, and they set developmentally appropriate expectations that are based on the youth's preferences and interests. And so things to consider in this regard, I'm a mentor to a 13-year-old kid, and he's a middle schooler. So there's a lot of talk right now in the mentoring field about promoting college access and helping kids get on the track to employment or higher education. My mentee is 13, so for me, a developmentally inappropriate match activity would be sitting down with a FAFSA, right? So a federal application for student aid. However, if I were matched with a 17-year-old kid, and if we stay together, I hope that he and I are matched when he's that age, that might be a really developmentally appropriate match activity. So instead, what I do with my mentee to help him think about college is just ask him questions about college. So who's your favorite sports team if you're watching the NCAA tournament? His is Michigan State. And I say, have you ever thought about going to college? What do you think about it? And so encouraging that type of age-appropriate activity, that type of age-appropriate conversation can really help foster that sense of closeness. And as we've said, closeness tends to facilitate positive outcomes for youth. So here you see the terminology prescriptive mentors, developmental mentors. You might also see the word mentee-driven. Matches that are successful tend to be mentee-driven, and that really means that the youth is involved in the activities that the match participates in, that the match is made first and foremost on the preferences of the youth and then of the youth's guardian. Sorry, we had a little glitch with our slideshow there. I think we're all back on track. So we spent the last couple minutes just talking about relationship factors. In addition to relationship factors between the mentor and the mentee, there are also program factors. So there are things that the program can do to help facilitate positive youth outcomes. So then turning from the mentor's approach and the relational approach toward the programmatic approach, there are several key roles that programs can play in facilitating the development of mentoring relationships. There is research that demonstrates that program factors such as the ones that you see up on your screen there, pre-match training and orientation, ongoing training for mentors, match support, and that includes staff contact during the match relationship with mentor, mentee, and guardian, providing adequate resources, space, and staff support within the program, and then if you're in a school-based setting, providing some type of summer contact between mentor and mentee. All of those programmatic factors can help lead to more satisfying and more effective relationships that are stronger and last longer. So another quick poll. I'm going to launch it so you can see it on your screen. What type of training are you currently engaged in with your mentors? So this would include pre-match training and ongoing training both. So take a look at that poll and just indicate what your program does. If you're unsure, just go ahead and select less than 1 hour. All right, thanks. I'm going to close the poll and we can share the results here. So we see that 50% of the people who are attending today are providing 3 to 4 hours, and 25 are at 5 to 6 hours. So 3/4 of the folks who are participating today are definitely on the right track in terms of the type of training opportunities that are provided to mentors. Thanks for responding there and helping to make this a little bit interactive. So turning to the importance of this training, so you all are already engaging in training, so this is a chance for us to kind of affirm the value of the training you provide, especially right now as we know that the economy has really taxed mentoring agencies around the state. So there is one study that has been done, and this includes school-based and community-based mentoring programs. This study demonstrates that mentors who received fewer than 2 hours of training reported the lowest levels of closeness and support in their relationships with youth. Now, on the flip side of that coin, mentors who received more than 6 hours of pre-match training and orientation tended to spend more time with their mentees and also reported higher levels of closeness. So you can see a strong correlation there between the amount of training that's provided and the level of reported satisfaction and closeness on the side of the mentor. An additional study, training was also a key factor in the national impact study that we mentioned earlier of school-based mentoring. And in this study, mentors who received more pre-match training, in addition to ongoing training, not only reported higher levels of closeness with their mentees, but they were also more likely to continue to mentor the child into a second year. So earlier we asked that question about mentor retention. We can begin to see a correlation not only between training and mentor satisfaction, but also mentor training and mentor retention. So providing support, providing meaningful opportunities for training is going to help you keep your mentors engaged from one year to the next.
All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the themes of early ending matches. And there's one study that analyzed interviews that were conducted after matches had ended, which points to a number of factors that may contribute to these matches ending early. The themes that were identified through these interviews were 1. Mentor or mentee abandonment, 2. Perceived lack of mentee motivation, 3. Unfulfilled expectations, 4. A lack of mentor relational skills, 5. Family interference, and inadequate agency support. And we're going to discuss each of these themes in a little bit more detail using examples from the interviews that were conducted with participants of the failed matches. Then we're going to discuss strategies or practices you can use to help manage some of these issues. The first is abandonment and lack of interest. Some youth and mentors interviewed had been abandoned by their partners who say never returned phone calls or simply never showed up for a scheduled visit. Both the youth and the mentors alike, they both described feeling disappointed, and one youth had decided not to be matched with another mentor despite his initial enthusiasm for the program. In a few cases, the mentors reported feeling that the young person was not particularly interested in having a mentor. These adults suspected that the youth had been encouraged by a parent or a peer to participate in the program, but had little to no interest in actually having a mentor. So rather than the youth deciding that they wanted to be in the program, it was more laid upon them. So the mentor kind of suspected that they weren't really all that interested in having a mentor. And so that was kind of one of the reasons that they identified that the matches were ending. And then the second is unfulfilled expectations. Several mentors described entering the relationship with some clear expectations about what they hoped it would be like, even though they expressed very few preferences during the matching process. When these expectations were not met, however, the adults struggled with the relationship. Some mentors had not anticipated how great the needs of the youth might be. They described feeling apprehensive about going to the youth's home and seeing the reality of their living conditions and the difficulties that the family faced. Other mentors expected to experience mostly positive feelings when they were with their mentees, and they seemed relatively unprepared for those challenges that can be encountered when building a relationship with a vulnerable youth. And then in addition, several relationships seem to falter in part because of the lack of important relational skills on the part of the mentor, namely a lack of youth focus, unrealistic or developmentally inappropriate expectation of the youth, and low awareness of the personal biases and how cultural differences can shape the relationships. So essentially they could not relate to their mentor because they didn't have those skills, whether that was something that they came into the relationship having or wasn't developed through the training and orientation process on the part of the mentoring program. In addition, some youth depicted their mentors as having a difficult time relating to them on their terms, and some mentors conveyed disappointment when their mentees did not initiate or reciprocate contact or overtly express appreciation of the mentor's effort. And a few mentors seemed unaware of the ways that cultural differences between themselves and their mentees may have been influencing the nature and course of their mentoring relationship and were not able to bridge these differences. Finally, we're going to discuss the effect of family interference and a lack of agency support. And of course, mentoring pairs are embedded within a larger context. They're not just individually surviving on their own. And in this case particularly, those contexts would be the mentoring program and the youth's family. And at times, these contacts can cause problems within the mentoring relationship. For example, in one case, it was suspected that an unsupportive family member had undermined the relationship by interfering with effective communication between the mentor and youth. Say, they weren't giving them phone messages, they weren't turning over the phone to the youth, things of that nature, just basically interfering between that communication, and so that the youth felt that the mentor wasn't communicating with them. And then in addition, in a few cases, program staff appear to have missed the opportunity to provide support and encouragement when the relationship began to struggle. And I'm going to turn it over to Ben now, and he's going to discuss some of the strategies to help prevent these relationship failures.
Okay, before we dive into some of the suggested strategies, I kind of want to sum up how we've talked about the reasons that relationships tend to end. In the first place, we covered some effective practices, some best practices related to supporting matches, okay? So there was some research that we discussed that described what mentoring programs can do and what mentors can do to help sustain mentoring matches over the long term. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of research that tells us why mentoring relationships end. So the negative reasons, the negative things that happen. So we're kind of getting at it, we're sort of reverse engineering in a way. We're looking at what do effective matches, what characteristics do effective matches display, and then sort of working backwards. So we know that effective matches are supported by mentoring agencies through training and ongoing support, and effective matches depend heavily on the mentors taking the right kinds of approaches. And so from there, we've kind of worked out to some of the things that Katie just described, some of the things that can actually cause mentoring relationships to end. So that's kind of the summary of what we've covered so far. I'll pause briefly, again, for any questions before we go forward, and I'll take about 20 seconds. If there's any questions, go ahead and type those in the chat log before we move forward. Okay, it looks like we don't, so thanks for taking a second. So beginning to look at preventing relationship failures. In the first place, it's important to say that not all early endings are avoidable. So some matches are simply going to end for whatever reasons. For example, some mentors or youth are going to experience unanticipated changes in their life circumstances, and those changes might prevent them from continuing their mentoring relationships. And what we've witnessed at the state level with the downturn in the economy is mentors having to move out of state. So matches have ended because unemployment has happened and people have had to relocate to find new jobs. But on the flip side, many relationships end to avoidable factors. So there are things that can be done to avoid those early terminations. One example would simply be disappointment and dissatisfaction with the relationship, and that could be on the side of the mentor, the mentee, and even the parent or guardian of the youth. So it's important to pay very close attention to these negative experiences that may be encountered by mentors, youth, and guardians. And when we do pay close attention, that can potentially help us identify key roles that programs may be able to play in preventing those failures. So as I mentioned, research on why mentoring relationships end is a little bit sparse. There's not a whole lot of research that's been done on this topic specifically. But the current research that we do have, what we know about strong matches, can help point us in the right direction to some practices that are definitely worth considering and implementing in your area. So to start looking into these strategies, research indicates that matches that are made with older youth, and particularly older youth with some more complex problems, such as psychological difficulties or histories of abuse within their own lives. Research into this youth population suggests that such matches, so if you make a match with that youth, such matches may need higher levels of program support to ensure success. So we've already talked about the importance of mentor training and the consistency of programmatic communication with matches. And in these cases specifically, when you're working with older youth who may be vulnerable to certain risk factors, it's especially important to take some concerted efforts to nurture and develop those matches. Additionally, special efforts may also be needed to nurture the development of female matches, so an adult woman with a younger female youth, so that they last long term, so that they last long enough to be satisfying to both participants. And then additionally, and you hear Mentor Michigan talk about this often, volunteers need to be screened carefully and intentionally, and consideration needs to be given to the life circumstances that they find themselves in. So, for example, if you're working with college students as mentors, you need to be very thoughtful and intentional about how the breaks between college semesters or summer breaks would impact a mentoring relationship. So if college age students is a target population for your recruitment efforts, what would it mean that those potential mentors might live out of state during the summer, or might spend 2, 3, or 4 weeks away from your mentoring program over the holidays? There are some specific things that you need to pay attention to in terms of support for those matches because of the amount of time that the mentors are away. Additionally, there's some research around establishing clear expectations for mentoring relationships right at the beginning. So the research suggests that right early on, you need to pay attention to the expectations that mentors and youth bring to the table in terms of their mentoring relationship. Mentoring programs may be able to offer greater assistance with identifying and expressing preferences for and expectations for the mentoring relationships. So here's one example strategy. In your program, you might develop and present descriptions of a variety of typical matches to prospective program participants to help identify preferences that they might have and expectations that they might bring to the table. And then additionally, spending more time up front before the match even starts and then early on in the initial weeks and months. Spend some time up front informing potential mentors and mentees about the nature of mentoring relationships. Include discussion around the typical challenges that mentoring relationships face, and then suggest strategies that they can employ to overcome those challenges. And particularly on the side of the mentor, suggest ways to handle conflict, suggest some ways that they can become more active listeners, and so on. Doing so can help your mentors and your youth begin to identify what their expectations really are, and this can potentially help reduce the rate of relationship failures. And I see a question that came in from Melissa. Melissa, thanks for asking the question. I'm just going to read it to the group and try to suggest some potential answer here. So her question is, what types of extra support does the research suggest for matches that are at risk, especially female mentoring relationships? So in terms of extra support, there were the two examples that were cited, and those were older youth who are potentially exposed to additional risk factors, and then also female mentoring relationships. I don't know exactly at what point this question came in, but there are a couple strategies that I would suggest that I think the research suggests. The first one being, especially in female matches, helping to get expectations on the table right away about what a relationship is. So there are really three perspectives, at least three perspectives in each mentoring relationship. In the first place, you have what the mentor expects out of this relationship, okay? So potential red flags to think about. If a mentor suggests in any way to you that the mentor is there to fix a broken child, right? That would be a red flag. That could be a potential perspective or a potential expectation that the mentor might bring to the table. A more positive example might be a mentor has a hobby that he or she is really interested in, and maybe that person had a mentor in his or her own life that helped nurture that hobby. So I know you asked specifically about females, but I'll give you a personal example. I'm really into basketball and sports, and I was really interested in mentoring because I had mentors in my own life who helped me foster and develop interests and skills in that area. So when I volunteered to be a mentor, I was telling them my match support specialist what I was interested in, and I said, I was really interested in sports when I was 13 years old. So I think it'd be really cool to kind of pass on some of that knowledge. So that would be another expectation that I would bring. I'm indicating that I'm expecting to be engaged in fun social activities that I'm interested in with my mentee. The second perspective would be the mentee perspective, and this might even really be two perspectives, but the mentee and the mentee's guardian. So again, I'll speak from my own personal experience. My mentee's guardian expressed that self-esteem was really one of the reasons that the youth was enrolled. He was about 11 when he was enrolled, and he just struggled with his self-esteem. So she communicated to me, anything you can do to affirm his skills and to recognize his accomplishments, that would be really valuable to us and our family. So that was an expectation that he brought to the table. Then finally, and I don't mean to keep rambling on, would be the programmatic perspective. So what do you expect out of volunteers, mentees, and then the matches? So we expect, for example, in our match that we're going to meet once a week for an hour, and then on weeks where we don't meet, the following week we're going to try to get together for 2 hours. So in terms of extra support, when we say extra support, what we really mean is helping to bring all of those expectations into the open. Okay, so when I had my first match meeting, there was a caseworker there who facilitated that meeting, who clearly laid out the boundaries of the mentoring program's policies and procedures. So you're allowed to go anywhere in the community as long as it's approved by the guardian. We're expecting that you'll get together once a week, and that most of the time, this isn't going to cost anything. It's just going to be a fun way for you to get together. Then the match support person gave me a chance to share my personal story with the mentee's guardian and with the mentee, and then the match support person gave the mentee and the mentee's guardian a chance to speak to what their expectations were. And then that was all facilitated by the match support specialist. So when we say additional support, I think what that would mean is including all of that pre-match orientation, including that facilitation of the initial meeting, and then paying attention to, as the match is ongoing, making sure to ask direct questions about those expectations and those needs. So that was a very long answer to a short question. I'm sorry if that was too much information. There's another question that came in from Megan, and I'm going to read that. Her question is, we provide several support meetings a month to mentors, but we do not have a high attendance rate. Any suggestions to get more mentors to come to meetings? That's a wonderful question, and that is an ongoing challenge. I would say there are a handful of us on the call. If anyone has any particular strategies that have worked, please feel free to send those in. I'll offer one suggestion, and I don't think it's groundbreaking, but I think it's something you might consider. If you know that you have mentors who have benefited from those support meetings, you might consider that mentor, you might consider engaging that mentor as a recruiter for those events. So it might be, you might not ask that person to film a PSA or something extravagant, but you might just have a phone call and say, I'd like to write a brief newsletter, I'd like to write an article for our newsletter, and I'd like to include your perspective as to how these meetings are important to you. And then you write up a couple paragraphs and feature it, like in the spotlight section of your newsletter. You give a brief overview of what these monthly meetings are, talk about the benefits and then include the mentor perspective. So-and-so from our program says, and then a couple key quotes or something like that. I hope that's helpful, Megan. I realize it's not a home run. Okay, there's no other questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. Discussing closure. The research suggests, and this might be somewhat counterintuitive, it might not make sense right off the bat, but the research suggests that it's important for mentoring programs to discuss the ending of the relationship right from the beginning of the relationship. Mentors and mentees might need to know right up front what their options are for ending a relationship so that they don't rely on simply abandoning the relationship if things get uncomfortable or if things become uncertain. So it's possible for a mentor or a mentee, for a variety of reasons, just simply to be uncomfortable with the relationship and the direction it's headed. And if they're not informed of the appropriate ways to handle those situations, it might be their reflex to simply abandon it. So it's important right from the beginning of the match to describe what the options are if the relationship needs to end. Sometimes matches simply must end due to external forces, like we mentioned, a job transfer or something like that. And some, on the other hand, some simply are not working well because of things that may be avoidable. And those relationships may benefit from assistance. And then if you come after that assistance that you've provided, if you realize that maybe this isn't a fixable issue, appropriate termination is important. So even those programs that hope to encourage relationships that continue indefinitely, so even beyond the time that the youth ages out of the program, even those programs need to consider and establish clear guidelines for ending relationships at the appropriate time. This next topic can be a little bit difficult, and your program's approach should be adapted to kind of your particular cultural setting. But it is important to address cross-cultural differences in mentoring relationships. Training that's directed toward helping mentors identify some of their own cultural and class-based values and beliefs, and training that helps them develop skills for effectively engaging and cross-cultural relationships with youth can be critical to the success of mentoring relationships. And early on, Katie noted that national research suggests that the majority of mentors that we have around the nation are middle-class Caucasian people. And the majority of youth that mentoring program serves are from minority homes. And they tend to be and live in poverty and in low-income communities. So there's an obvious cultural difference there that needs to be accounted for. There are some training models that have been developed to help mentoring program staff address these issues. They're not specifically developed for youth mentoring programs per se, but they are included in this research in action issue, so issue number 5. And they give you some suggestions as to how you might begin to contextualize them based on the needs of your community and the populations that you serve. So there's information around cultural knowledge, around cultural competency, around skills that can be developed to enhance both of those, and some resources around personal awareness. If you're interested in learning more about those, please feel free to download this issue and take a look at those resources. And then finally, this will be the last thing that you hear me keep talking about, and this is match support. And we've already talked about this to some extent and to some detail already. But monitoring mentoring matches and providing ongoing trainings are among the program practices that are most closely associated with positive youth outcomes. So providing training early on and then providing consistent communication and support is closely linked to positive outcomes for the young people in your program. These practices potentially, as we said, also serve to help reduce the number of matches that end early. Regular contact with matches on a periodic basis provides program staff the opportunity to identify difficulties as they arise, rather than them escalating into something more severe, and allows them the opportunity to provide assistance or to facilitate termination in the event of an inappropriate match. And then finally, ongoing training provides mentors with a chance to receive assistance if they are struggling with something, if they are dealing with challenging situations, and it provides a chance to assist them with the continued development of their skills as a mentor.
All right, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of a conclusion on just the research portion of this issue. So once a match between a mentor and a young person is made, the work has only just begun. You have to identify and address common pitfalls in formal mentoring relationships so that programs can better support the mentors and the youth in their efforts to build close, enduring, and growth-promoting relationships. As practitioners who work with youth, the first motto of all mentoring programs should be do no harm to the youth served. Research demonstrates that mentoring relationships that end prematurely have the potential to do harm to the mentee, leaving him or her in a worse situation than if no mentoring had been received. In the struggle to prevent the early termination, the mentoring field is always looking for new information about the factors that predict or cause relationships to end prematurely. Dr. Spencer's article provides significant insight into some of these underlying causes of match failure and strategies to prevent or correct these issues in mentoring programs. Now I'm going to take a minute here just to pause. Does anybody have any questions on the research portion of it before we delve a little bit into the action portion? It looks like we don't have anything coming through. So now this action section tackles Dr. Spencer's recommendations, and it creates 8 typical match descriptions and explains how these descriptions might be used with program participants. Throughout the action section, Dr. Spencer uses the term relationship prototype to refer to these example relationship descriptions. So throughout it, when you see the term prototype, just think typical match description. And there are a number of ways in which these prototypes or typical match descriptions could be incorporated into your program operations. And these include during the prospective mentor interviews, you could use the descriptions to provide potential mentors with concrete examples of how a relationship might work. So we talked about a little bit earlier about the expectations that mentors have coming in and using examples. Some of these can be used for that strategy. And then, in addition, you can use them during the mentor training. So program staff could use them as scenarios with mentors discussing expectations and also their reaction to that situation and strategies that they could use for coping or addressing it as needed. So it's kind of tackling the issue before it comes up in their specific relationship. And then also with supervision or ongoing training, the mentors could use these prototypes to assess their current relationship, where they think it is now, and then where they would like it to be, because it's on a spectrum. So program staff can help mentors explore these strategies to move the relationship in the direction that they want it to be. With all of these strategies, the purpose of the prototypes is the same. It's to assess mentor expectations about the match, to gauge mentor relational skills and motivation in various circumstances, and to determine how much and what kind of agency support is wanted and needed by the mentor. And 5 categories of factors that affect the functioning and feel of the mentoring relationship itself were created to create these relationship prototypes. The categories include mentee temperament, mentee motivation or engagement, mentee environment, personal mentee challenges, and lastly, relationship intensity. For each category, there are two extremes and a description of how each extreme might be demonstrated in a mentoring relationship. The arrow between represents the spectrum of variations that lie between the two extremes. And it should be noted that while each prototype examines only one characteristic in isolation, it's important to recognize that most mentoring relationships, within them, multiple factors interact with each other. So now just to give you an example of one of these prototypes, here is the one that they use for relationship intensity. As you can see, there's in that second box, there's two extremes. The collegial friendly on the left-hand side, and then personal and involved on the right-hand side. Under each extremes, there's examples. So for the first one, the relationship example, the mentor and the mentee enjoy each other's company and have fun together. They meet regularly as required by the program and participate in a variety of activities, but they don't do anything extra. They talk about school, career, the future, but keep many aspects of their lives private. And then the other end of the spectrum is the relationship example would be mentor and mentee are very connected in multiple aspects of life, including school and family. They see and talk to each other often, usually more than the program requires. They share their hopes, dreams, failures, and successes, and see each other as an integral part of their life. So what you could do is you could use these as examples within your training to kind of show the different examples, and then also with current mentors you can say, where do you fall on this spectrum? Where would you like to be? And then discuss with them strategies of how to achieve that goal. Now this is only one of the prototypes that Dr. Spencer outlines in the action section of the issue. Just make sure you download issue number 5 from Mentor's website to explore and utilize these models and activities in your program. And now we're going to go a little bit just into a few resources that were highlighted within the issue itself. Mentor, which is the organization that has created these research and action series, they are the National Mentoring Partnership. And they have many resources available on their website about this topic in addition to the actual research and action issue. It's specifically for, in this case, for match support and supervision and match closer. And their website is listed above. It's mentoring.org. And then a second website that you should visit is the National Mentoring Center at Education Northwest. They have a ton of free resources on their website, and in relation to this issue, under the Mentor-Mentee Training and Relationship Support Resources section, which that website is listed above too, they include a Overcoming Relationship Pitfalls fact sheet, as well as a fact sheet regarding managing risk after the match is made. And so you can visit their website listed above. Okay, that is all for the Research and Action series. Are there any questions or comments? We can go ahead and unmute everyone who's on the phone, or you can raise your hand, or type it in the question box. Doesn't look like we have any questions or comments. And just to note that this afternoon, this presentation, the actual presentation, should be available on our SlideShare account, which is slideshare.net/MentorMichigan, all one word. That website will also be listed in the follow-up email that you'll get tomorrow. In addition, we've recorded this webinar, so in case you wanted to go back and listen to the presentation itself and take more thorough notes, anything like that, that link to that will also be included in the follow-up email. You should get that tomorrow at some point. Okay, well that's it. Thanks so much for joining us on the webinar today. Have a good afternoon.